All of your gadgets are getting more expensive. Hundreds of pounds or dollars are being tacked onto the prices of phones, laptops, games consoles, even if those devices are years old, and it's all to do with computer memory, which you probably never think about, but is suddenly extremely expensive. I speak to an insider to find out why, and whether it's going to get any better. Normally, you would expect a product that was released 6 years ago to be cheaper today, but in the topsy-turvy world that we now live in, you'll now pay about £170 more for a 2020 Xbox than you would have paid in 2020. And we're seeing this across phones, computers, games consoles, and it does not seem to be getting better. It seems to be getting worse. So what's going on? Well, I'm speaking to Ben Hatton, an analyst at FDM CCS Insight, who's going to take us on this very bizarre journey of why everything suddenly costs loads of money. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. As you said, I'm an analyst at FDM CCS Insight. We're a kind of market research firm within the tech world. So I cover a lot of research on devices. So that covers everything from laptops, smartphones, to the weird and wonderful world of AI devices and wearables and VR headsets and whatnot. And yeah, looking forward to chatting about all things memory today.
And I imagine most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about memory, but people do spend a lot of time thinking about the prices and the cost of everything. And I know when you talk to tech companies, I'm sure they feel also very beleaguered by the cost of everything too. So can you give us a little brief overview of what's going on, and then we can get into what memory is and why it's so expensive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, before the start of this year, even I didn't speak a lot about memory, but it seems to be the only thing I talk about with anyone these days. So the long and the short of it is AI companies are building massive data centers to run all their AI models and all the training and all the work that they need to do. And they're buying a load of memory chips from the only 3 companies in the world that really make this stuff. And that means that there is fewer and fewer chips for everyone else to buy. And that's the companies that are making the laptops that we're speaking on, everyone's phones. And they're getting a lot more expensive. They're getting a lot more expensive. And that is going to start to make phones more expensive and laptops. And it's becoming a real problem for everyone in the tech supply chain.
And so when did this sort of start to begin as a problem? Because it feels like there was a while where it was maybe being absorbed by the tech companies. That feels like it's not happening. As I know there is still some absorption, but it feels like costs are actually now finally being passed on to regular shoppers.
Yeah, this story kind of goes back to about halfway through 2025, maybe even the start of 2025, when those big AI companies, the major 7 from Anthropic and OpenAI to Google, Amazon, etc., they started really building out data centers everywhere and anywhere, right? And they're in the news all the time. These super computing spaces that are just racks and racks of servers, so they can run all their AI. And they've been buying more and more memory in order to do that. And to put it into context, the memory chips used in data centers are very different to the ones that we have in our phones, right? The ones in data centers are called, this thing's called high bandwidth memory, which you can basically think of as 12 memory chips stacked on top of each other. So for every 1 chip they need in there, you use 12 fewer for smartphones and everything else. And so the AI companies are paying top dollar. They're investing literally trillions of dollars into these big servers. And so the memory companies are more than happy to make them this stuff if they're paying them all this money, because why wouldn't they? And so that is just effectively squeezing how many they can make for everyone else, because they're making it for the data companies. And so that is kind of getting worse and worse and worse. And you can't just kind of whip up more of this stuff, right? You need to build out new facilities and new kind of engineering, kind of fabrication plants in order to make it. That takes billions of dollars and several years to make. And so it's not kind of we'll just make some more, we can deal with that. They have to wait a couple of years before they can do that. And so the price is going up for everybody. And now it's starting to get to the point where everyone's phones are going up as well.
So when I buy a phone or a computer or a laptop, what is memory? Why do I need memory in my device? Is it one of those things that companies can cut back on? Because I suppose regular tech users will have some kind of concept of storage on their devices. There will be storage chips. I think the idea of RAM is probably a bit more nebulous. I think probably not a lot of people have a clue what RAM is or what RAM's doing. So can you talk about the different types of memory and what it's actually doing on the device and why we need memory in our gadgets?
Yeah, so there are 2 basically two different types of memory. You've got long-term memory and short-term memory. The long-term memory is that storage, right? How much stuff can I put on my phone? Apps, music, videos, photos, etc. And that's this measured in gigabytes, and it goes up to, the largest ones are now a terabyte of storage, which is a lot of storage. So you can store thousands and thousands of pictures on your phone, if not millions. And then, so that's what storage is, and that is affected as well, but not quite as badly as RAM. And RAM is the short-term memory, and that is effectively a measure of how powerful your phone is, right? So if you have more RAM on your phone, it can do more things at once, it can do more complicated things, and it can do them all faster. So it's effectively a measure of how many things your phone can do at the same time. And kind of the way I can describe it is, when you're running your phone, it feels like it's running really slowly. And so you open up and you say, well, what have I got open here? And you've got kind of 15, 20, 25 apps open. And then you close them all, and then you use your phone, it feels like it's running faster. That's because you're opening up the RAM and the memory for it to be able to do, I only need to focus on this one thing, I can just dedicate myself to that. So that's what RAM is, and modern phones have about 12 or 16 gigabytes of it, which is quite a lot. And that's what makes them super fast and super capable of doing all the things that we do on our phones today.
Over the decades, we've all grown up with tech getting better as time goes on. We have more RAM. I mean, certainly if you think back 20 years, the amount of RAM that was in a computer was very, very small compared to the RAM that we have today. But it feels like maybe now it's going the other way, because RAM is simply so expensive that, you are having these conversations about, well, should we put less RAM in phones? Should the next iPhone have less RAM? Which I think is probably counter to what most people think of as, progress in tech, where we would ideally want more RAM, but it's just so expensive for these companies now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to put it into context, I think RAM is about 5 or 6 times more expensive now than it was at the start of last year. So if it used to cost you, let's say $50, $60 to make a 12 gigabyte smartphone, now it'll cost you $350 to make a 12, 16 gigabyte phone. So that is, almost impossible to just keep doing and keep costs the same. And so companies have kind of got two decisions, right? And ultimately, the really important thing to realize or remember is things like 5G, things like AI, these require a lot of RAM because the phone is taking in a lot of data, it's kind of processing a lot of data, so it needs that power in order to be able to handle it. So a lot of the best phones still require a lot of RAM, but as you say, it's getting increasingly expensive. And so there's a real rock and a hard place for a lot of these manufacturers to be in that they want to keep increasing the RAM because they want to make their phones as good as possible, but they are struggling to justify making phones 500 quid more expensive. And so some of them are reducing the amount of memory that's in them, which is, as you say, a real step change to how these things normally work. Everything gets better, but now companies are starting to say, well, we actually can't afford to do this. We can't afford to buy all these chips in the first place to make them. So they're starting to sort of cut down on it a little bit in order to manage those costs, which helps consumers because we're not paying as much for a new phone, but it means they're not quite as capable as everyone may have hoped they would be this time 2 years ago when they think about the next phone and the next phone and the next phone.
And of course, it's not just phones as well. I mean, I opened with the reference about the Xbox. The Xbox has gone up by £170, which is, phenomenal really for a console that came out, I think, 6 years ago now. Obviously, PlayStation put their prices up earlier this year. I think Nintendo is meant to put their prices up on the Switch in September. So it's not just affecting phones either, it's affecting and of course, if you're trying to build a PC or just buy a stock PC, that's going to cost you more money too.
Yeah, I mean, no one is safe really from this whole problem. And that's kind of the crazy thing about this is that it's, the AI boom is causing almost every corner of electronics to really suffer. Generally speaking, the kind of products, devices that are affected more are the ones that are doing more of that processing. So if you think on a phone, a laptop, computer, games consoles, tablets as well, these are things that you're doing stuff on regularly, right? You're gaming, you're browsing the web, you're watching videos, etc. If you're doing a lot of stuff with it, it needs a lot of memory because it needs to process a lot of information at the same time, right? It's doing a million things at the same time. Whereas something like a smartwatch doesn't necessarily do as many things. If anything, it connects to your phone to let your phone do all of that, and it can just kind of collect data. So there are some things that are not affected too badly, but generally speaking, all major electronics products are being badly affected. You're absolutely right. All of the major games consoles are going up. All laptops are going up, all computers are going up, be those the sort of mid-range, semi-cheap ones, sort of $200 to $500, as well as the ones that cost $3 or $4 grand, because those are the ones that can run AI on them. And if you're running AI on them, that needs a lot more processing power. And so that's where all the RAM's going. And so they're getting a lot more expensive as well. So, no one is safe from this problem, really. And it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon as well.
I mean, you sort of hinted at it there at the end, but there is an irony to the fact that all of this memory is going to these AI companies to effectively make our devices more powerful and more capable. But it's that exact situation that is causing our devices to become more expensive or less powerful. And so it's a very strange situation to be in.
The kind of wider AI arms race is what drives all of this. But at the same time, you've got a lot of companies that are trying to move away from using AI in all these data centers, right? It's really expensive. And you have this thing called latency, which is the time it takes to send signals from your phone to the cloud and back again. And if you're trying to run AI models through servers connected 300 kilometers away, that adds time, it adds a lot of cost, and data centers are becoming incredibly expensive to run. And so there are a lot of companies trying to move AI onto devices, and that is seen as kind of the next step. It's more economical in a lot of senses because you don't have to pay for the cloud or the data centers to do it for you. It just does it all on your own phone. But as you say, we're back to where we started again. To do that, you need more memory, and we haven't got any memory. So everyone's kind of struggling in terms of what is the balancing act to find with this at the moment. At the moment, the power goes to the companies willing to spend the most money, and the companies willing to spend the most money are the hyperscalers with the blank checks that just say, we will buy these chips from you at basically name your price, and we will buy them off you, and we will buy them off you for the next 5 years. And so if you were a memory provider, you'd be foolish not to just take that money, because obviously you would. And so that's what they're doing. And so, yeah, this cycle kind of continues to repeat itself over and over again. And it only really stops when memory providers can start to literally make more of it so that they can meet everyone's demand at the same time. But as I kind of said a little bit earlier, it takes so long. These chips these days are so complex. It's some of the most precision engineering that we do as a kind of human society. So you can't just whip this stuff up. And that is what's causing the problems, in that these companies are building these new facilities, but it'll take them 3 to 5 years before they're ready. So in the meantime, we've just got to kind of wait, and either AI companies stop spending all this money, which might happen, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen very soon. So we're just stuck in this constant loop.
So who actually makes the RAM? Well, I know there are 3 major companies that are pumping out most of the RAM, but what does the sort of the RAM landscape look like?
Yeah, so you're right. There are 3 companies that make it. So 2 in South Korea. One is Samsung of Samsung devices. They make phones as well. A company called SK Hynix. They're a big South Korean conglomerate. One of their arms is this memory producer. I think they're the largest. And then there's a US company called Micron. And between those 3, they make more than 90% of global DRAM. So that's the memory chips that we're talking about, whether that be for phones, laptops, computers, gaming consoles, whatever, all the way through to this HBM, high bandwidth memory that data centers are using as well. There's a few in China, but they are very small. And so some of the American companies like Apple have recently said, we would like to go and buy from them because the other 3 simply cannot make enough. It's a pretty tough sell at the moment for an American company to go and ask the US government permission to go and trade with a Chinese memory provider. And I think the US have said no. So they're kind of stuck to some extent in the US. I doubt European companies would be rushing to go and buy this stuff either. So these are the 3 companies that make it. A lot of microchips and kind of processors are so complex now that there are very few companies that make a very specific part of all of it. So there's only a few companies that make the CPUs, there's a few companies that make GPUs, there's a few companies that make the memory, there's a few companies that make the silicon disks that they make this stuff from. So it's all really specialized, and because it's so specialized and so expensive to make, you can't just kind of say, oh, we're going to start making this stuff now, because you'd need $50 billion to even try before you even get into the fact that you don't even know how it works. So that is why there's very few companies making it, and there isn't really a short-term solution to just making more of it.
No, I'm sort of thinking of, a hot summer day where you can just knock up a lemonade stand because it's, everyone's baking. This is a complete opposite, isn't it? It takes so much time, so much energy, so much technical expertise as well. I mean, a lot of the people that work at these companies will have technical expertise that you can't just find on the general job market. And so, it seems like this is going to drag on because there's no way to quickly ramp up the supply of memory to all of these companies trying to make phones or tablets or laptops or games consoles.
Absolutely.
Where are we seeing the biggest problems for this? Is it smartphones, or is it just generally the same across the board? So what I mean by that is, are different kinds of products impacted differently by this, or is it just generally anyone buying memory is impacted effectively to the same degree because it's just so expensive?
It's a little bit of both. So everybody is affected by it because memory is memory to a large extent, but there are different types of memory used in different devices. So in smartphones, they use memory that takes quite low power because you only have a small battery in your phone and you don't want your phone to die in 2 hours. That's affected, but it's not Armageddon. Whereas if you look it's pretty bad. If you look at something like laptops and computers, they use more powerful memory, and that is quite badly affected. And you mentioned earlier, right? If you're building a PC or you just want to upgrade your PC, the cost of a memory stick that you can put into the computer has gone from like $100 to $750 or something daft. And so it becomes completely unaffordable. And so that is really badly affected, and games consoles are also pretty bad. So it kind of depends on what type of memory is used, but also the age of memory, because companies keep trying to make the newest stuff because it's better, it's more expensive, so they can make more money off it. So if you're looking for older stuff, they don't make it anymore. So not only do you want everyone trying to buy it, you have no one making it. And so that is also even more affected because there's no supply of it to go with the infinite demand for it. So it's kind of complicated to some extent in the sense that so many different types of chip and so many different types of memory are affected differently. But generally speaking, sort of the more powerful stuff, and ironically the older stuff, is more badly affected than some of the newer stuff, which they are churning out a little bit to some extent to kind of keep it a little bit under control.
And of course, some of these big memory suppliers are basically completely switching away from producing sort of consumer memory. I mean, I know Micron in the US, if you were trying to build a PC in the previous years gone by, you would be able to buy a lovely crucial RAM stick for your computer, and they've just said, no, we're not going to do that anymore, making so much money from the AI companies.
Yeah, who could blame them, really? I mean, that's what I would do if I was a memory company. You've got these basically 5 or 6 companies coming to you with a blank check saying, put your number down and make us all these chips. And Micron's revenue went up from about $10 billion in the second quarter of last year to more than $40 billion this quarter, just because it's making way more of this stuff for the data center companies, and the price of memory has gone up everywhere. So they're just cashing in, and it's good business to a large degree, right? I mean, I can't really blame them. They're not the problems here to a large degree, in that they're just doing what any sensible business should do and cash in on the AI gold rush like everyone else is. So that's kind of the major problem, and a lot of the new facilities that are being built are going to be dedicated to making more of that stuff because they're like, well, this is where we're making the money, so this is what we're going to make. So there is fewer and fewer opportunities for these companies to get it, and obviously it's kind of unsaid, I guess, in the industry that there is a bit of a hierarchy, a pecking order as to who gets what when they ask for it. If you're an Apple or a Samsung making hundreds of millions of devices every year, you could be pretty confident that you're going to get what you want because you can offer contracts for hundreds of millions of chips. Whereas if you're a company that only makes a few million, you're going to struggle to try to make your voice heard at the moment because they're making so many chips for everyone else. They're not going to make 1 million 4 gigabyte DRAM chips for a lowly smartphone or even a watch company because they're like, well, we're dealing with bigger numbers over here, so we're not gonna bother. So there is this kind of hierarchy where a lot of the smaller players with less buying power are just kind of getting shunted out, and they have to pay top dollar that they just can't afford.
And I especially think of like the budget phone manufacturers, people making the really cheap phones, the one that you might buy for your sort of, your 90-year-old nan, these under £100 phones, or the ones that are, very popular in, some of the developing countries. To make those phones now is immensely difficult because to try and keep a phone, already the margins are quite thin on those phones anyway, but to try and keep a phone under £100 or $100 in this situation is very problematic.
I think it's more than problematic. It's basically impossible. I mean, you'd have to kind of downgrade the phone to a point where you might as well go and buy a Nokia 3310 20 years ago, and you'd probably get a better device than what you could make for 100 quid these days. So it's a huge problem for the companies making devices like that. And it wouldn't be a surprise if in a couple of years' time you can't buy a phone for that kind of price. It would basically be the equivalent of an old dumb phone 15 years ago in what it can do, because you can't buy the RAM, you won't be able to store very much, it'd probably only be 4G, and we're kind of going back 15, 20 years in terms of what it's capable of, just because you can't afford the kind of cutting edge, or anything close to the cutting edge at that kind of price.
Well, I wonder if we are going to go back to a situation where actually maybe it makes more sense to get used phones, refurbished phones, because I felt like it was already going that way a little bit anyway, because phones, they get software support for so long now. I mean, if you buy a brand new iPhone, that can easily last you 5 to 7 years. I mean, the quality is there, and I suppose the upgrades for people seem more incremental now. The difference between an iPhone from last year isn't hugely different from an iPhone for the year before. Over that 5-year span, it is obviously very different. And so I wonder if we're going to see a sort of boom in the used phones market, the refurbished phones market, because it's just a more economical way of getting phones. Obviously, that can only last for so long because, if the supply is drying up at one end, it's going to tail back. But I just wonder if that will be the situation.
Yeah, I think I totally agree, to be honest. I think if you look at the last 4 or 5 years of smartphones, they're not massively different from how they were at the start of that time. So ultimately, if you're buying if you want a kind of the cutting edge phone, and you absolutely demand the most cutting edge phone, then you can go and buy the latest iPhone or the latest Samsung or whatever. But ultimately, there isn't a massive amount of difference between that and the same phone they released 4 or 5 years ago. And you can buy that phone in refurbished markets for a fifth of the price, a quarter of the price, a half the price, and you get basically the same thing. And we do a lot of work on second-hand phones and kind of the circular economy, and we're certainly seeing that it's growing quite a lot. It's becoming a lot more popular. Phones are getting more reliable as second-hand. I think they are designed and built to last a long time now. I think manufacturers have got quite good at that, and they've become aware that consumers do actually want a phone that lasts as long as they want it to. And so that means that buying a phone for a second life becomes totally attainable. It's way cheaper, and actually we're seeing a lot of companies start to look at using refurbished phones to sort of fill those little price gaps that new devices can no longer fill, because you can't really buy a phone for £250 anymore because that phone now costs £400. And so if you can go and buy an old refurbished iPhone 11 for £250, you get an iPhone without having to pay iPhone prices, and you get a phone for decent price. So you're not paying top dollar at all, and you still get an iPhone, and it works pretty well. That is kind of the way in which we are starting to see the wind blowing, because as you say, there are not many alternatives, at the moment to how else do we sell phones for this price.
I wonder how this all ends. Does this get better? I mean, I know there are lots of estimates, lots of speculation. I mean, it certainly seems like in the short term, it's not getting better. I mean, I know there are lots of predictions about, the new iPhone is meant to come out in September. Lots of predictions about that being a lot more expensive. You see estimates up to, $300 more expensive. So I think everyone is sort of bracing for that. But when does it sort of start to ease off? I mean, it's hard to predict the future, I suppose, but I mean, will it ease off eventually? Will we have enough RAM supply, or will the demand for AI data centers shrink a little bit? I mean, that in itself is a difficult prediction to make.
Yeah, so I mean, if we knew the answer to that, we'd be very wealthy men. So, but I mean, ultimately, there's kind of two or three ways in which this ends, right? Either the AI bubble bursts, and that would be spectacular. And frankly, I think the price of phones would be the least of all of our worries if that happened. But that's a possibility. Or if it doesn't burst, at least investors of these companies start to say, now you're pushing your luck a bit here, chaps. You can't keep spending $1 trillion a year without showing us any kind of money coming in. And maybe they then start to just slow that investment. So that's kind of one option. And that, if they're buying fewer of those chips, then the memory companies can go back to making everyone else's chips and we can all be happy again. The second kind of solution is, let's say, mid-2028, 2029 time. More facilities come online. These companies start to make more chips for everyone else because they're now satisfying all the data center needs. And that may bring the price down a little bit. It may just kind of keep it flat. The way we kind of see it at the moment is this is probably the new normal for pricing in this world. It's unlikely to be a big boom and bust. It may come down a little bit, but I don't think we're going to be looking at $3 a gigabyte of RAM anymore. I think those days are over. So that's kind of the next option. And then the third option is this kind of more serious scenario where both of those two things happen at the same time. And the memory providers build all these new facilities to make all this memory, and then suddenly no one wants it because all the AI companies have said no mas. And so then it's big trouble because now they've got all these facilities, they're making all this memory and no one wants to buy it. So then it becomes really cheap again, but that would lead to huge problems for various companies and investors and whatnot, and that would probably lead to another recession. So there aren't many positive ways to spin this out as this will all be fine in the future. It will all be fine in the future, but there's a few moving parts that need to happen in order for that to be the case, really.
But I suppose if there was advice to people who are thinking, maybe I'll wait a couple of years to buy my next phone or games console, I suspect the advice is, maybe don't hang around because the prices might end up going up more.
Yeah, I think my advice would be buy secondhand because they're all as good as they are brand new and you'll save yourself a fortune. Or buy it sooner rather than later. Prices will probably keep going up at least through next year, maybe even into the start of 2028. They may even go on longer. We're currently looking at about mid-2028. So if you're going to buy something, probably want to buy it sooner rather than later, but secondhand is a great option. And you can buy loads of refurbished electronics and tech from loads of great retailers these days. So there's plenty of options around, and that's probably the most economical way to buy new devices these days.
Brilliant. Thank you for speaking to me, Ben.
Thanks very much, Sean.